is Tanner. I'm a student in your English class, and this is my presentation on the truth about Islam. Here we go. My thesis, there's supposed to be music for this, I'm sorry I lost it. Anyway, my thesis is that Islam is a complex and beautiful faith that is often misunderstood by the West. So the goal of this presentation is to sort of analyze a little bit about what Islam is about and how we've kind of grown into some misconceptions about it in the West. All right, so some misconceptions and refutations. In a quote by the scholar of Islam named Hamid Dabashi, he's quoted as saying, "Nothing in the Quran, Islamic theology, or Islamic law in any way, shape, or form justifies ramming 2 airliners into civilian buildings." So one of the things we've come upon in Western society is that we have this idea that Islam is an inherently violent, radical, tyrannical faith, so to speak. And I'm here to say that this isn't necessarily the case. In fact, one of the things I wanted to point out is that pretty much in every great religious tradition, Christianity, even Judaism, Islam especially, as we already know, every great religious tradition that is popular among masses of people in the world has a tendency to reflect a little bit of violence and both a little bit of peace at the same time. So often we see it's not necessarily the doctrine itself, it's how people interpret it. So saying that Islam is inherently violent or radical is a bit of a misnomer. It's actually kind of erroneous to say that. Anyway, a little bit of history. Islam, like many popular world religions, was indeed spread by conquest. Beginning with the Arab conquests of the 7th century, Islam had managed to reach most of the known world by the 15th century. So during this time, after the Prophet Muhammad died, I want to say in like 623, Islam was spread by conquest, much like other world religions were, much like Christianity and so on and so forth. However, one thing that sort of distinguished Islam from other world religions at the time is when they were spreading their message and when they were conquering other territories and moving about in the known world, they had a relationship with other Abrahamic religions, being Christianity and Judaism. And the thing was that when they entered a new territory and they began to take over, they gave their captives a little more options other than exile or death or simply conversion. Islam allowed other Abrahamic religions the opportunity of what is called dhimma, and that was the opportunity to still practice their faith without conversion, without the threat of execution, and so on and so forth, with a minor tax. So, say Islam came in and started to take over the government, they would say, okay, you can still practice your religion, but we'll tax you for it. We won't kill you. And at that time, that was something that was unprecedented. Christianity wasn't even doing it. So, to bring this all into context, I'm sure in the media some of you guys have heard quotes from the Quran saying, you know, how followers of Islam should participate in holy wars and so on and so forth. And while a bit of this is true, I will concede there's also another part of Islam that a lot of people don't see, and there's actual textual evidence in the Quran itself to support this. So starting in Book 2, called the Cow in the Quran, the Prophet Muhammad says, "Fight those in the way of God who fight you, but do not be aggressive. God does not like aggressors." In Book 5, verse 45, "Though he forgoes it, retribution out of charity, or though he who forgoes it, retribution out of charity atones for his sins." So this is basically saying that instead of getting revengeance or retribution, it's actually better to forgo that and to be charitable, merciful, so on and so forth. The Quran also has something to say about people who are non-Muslims. Obviously, unbelievers are addressed in the Quran. But more specifically, as I mentioned earlier, there are 2 other faiths that are like Islam, and that's Christianity and Judaism. And the Quran tells us that these people are to be respected and allowed to have their religious freedom. And also in the book titled The Unbelievers in the Quran, it says, "O you unbelievers, I do not worship what you worship, nor do you worship who I worship. To you your way, and to me my way." And that's basically saying those who are unbelievers, we're just going to have to deal with it. Reconciliation. Now, obviously we've heard a lot about violence in Islam, violence around the world, and so on and so forth. But however, there is an historical context to a lot of the violence we would see in the scriptures and the sacred texts. Earlier on, in the early days of Islam, there was a lot of persecution against Muslims, so the Prophet Muhammad would write about protecting oneself. In fact, in Islam, initially, the only hostilities that were permitted were ones that were for self-defense. And as soon as the enemy wished to stop hostilities, then Muslims, a good Muslim, would have to agree and find a better way to deal with things, so to speak. So, moving forward. Luckily for modern society, the threat of religious conquest is not what it was. Now, I believe the key to alleviating a lot of these misconceptions about Islam is simply a better system of education about a foreign religion and about a foreign culture. And another professor of Islam, his name is, I forget his name, excuse me. However, the quote is up on the computer. If, however, we say that the Christian teaching is that if anyone raises his head against you, you should use all your might to trample it to death, it would be a grave injustice. And so it is with Islam. We've done this religion a great injustice by truly not understanding exactly and thoroughly what it is saying. Instead, we've relied on sensationalism and those sort of things to give us an unclear picture of what Islam is actually really about. And that's what I hope to dispel in this presentation. There's my works cited. Thank you very much.